it doesn't sound good, you know. The three priests living in an Ireland sitcom. It's like, oh, if I heard about it, I'd hate it.
We formed a band, the Joshua Trio, and originally a musical group, but we opened it up into recreating scenes from the life of U2.
It was a U2 parody,
Yeah.
Wasn't it? They do song versions of, you know, I still haven't found what I'm looking for, which older viewers might remember, and they do a cappella versions or Frank Sinatra style big band versions or things like this, and it was kind of, I always call it our footlights.
Yes.
It was like
Graham became involved in the non-musical side, the recreating scenes from the life of U2,
which
like
involved a bit of
Bono.
script writing and so on.
Yeah.
So that's probably that was probably our first
working relationship.
Yeah, writing relationship.
I did Father Ted as during the Joshua Trio days, and when Paul was in another band called the Tony St. James Band Experience, whatever it was called. And Ted would just come in between songs or costume changes.
Yeah, you'd be sitting in the audience and Paul would go off stage and then Arthur would stand up, walk to the microphone and just pull, or just stick a little white thing in a
just
black
talk.
shirt.
I'd say, I remember one thing I used to say was, if there's anyone at the back who can't see, say hello to them because they're from St. Kevin's School for the Blind. And that's the kind of joke, really, that used to go down.
And at Christmas, I remember once Arthur came out and said, does anyone in the audience, hands up, anyone in the audience have any relatives who are dead? And people would put their hands up. And Arthur said, well, maybe this time of year you should think about visiting them because it's around this time of year they begin to feel very low. And also, he would talk about a Father Dougal who was off on the missions.
That's right.
And
That's right.
Father Dougal was having a very bad time in kind of,
remote villages
where they were always, attacking him or chasing him out of town.
He had a little book, Notes from Africa, by Father Dougal Maguire.
Yeah.
But he wasn't anything. He was a kind of ambivalent type figure.
It's a great name. And
but he bears no relation to the character that ended up in Father Ted. And Graham moved to write for a music magazine in London, and then I retired from Hot Press. I decided to move over to London for a couple of months, really, and while we were there, we were living together and we decided to write together scripts and sent them in to production companies.
First thing we got on air was a radio sketch, 5 minutes long, and the reception was very bad and I had to lie on the ground to listen to it, and it was terrible. And it was also the worst received radio pilot in BBC history, I understand. It all happened in tantalising bits, like we'd hear someone liked our sketches and we'd go to a meeting and then the sketch, we handed some sketches into Smith and Jones and I remember we saw this big pile of our sketches, and Griff, who is the star of Smith and Jones, which was a sketch show over here, had put huge ticks beside anything he liked, and I remember putting these scripts down, and all the ones that I thought were good and Arthur thought were good had huge ticks, and it was just terribly exciting seeing those huge ticks and things like that would make us think, God, maybe we can do this, and
we went to a lot of script meetings and stuff with them.
Well, we learned, there was a brilliant, I wanted to go all the time because I thought it was, I wanted to learn as much as I could about it, and we went to we basically unofficially worked as staff writers for a year, and it really was like learning the nuts and bolts of comedy, because they'd give us footage of some tanks driving back from the news, and they'd say just write a sketch about the two people in that tank.
Using the footage.
And use the footage. So, these comedy muscles would be exercised until finally we were pretty good all-rounders, I think. You know, we had an idea of visual comedy and dialogue. You know, we had to write some very dialogue-driven pieces, and as a result, we were just, you know, building up these muscles, and so by the time we got to our first sitcom, which was called Paris, we were in a good state. Although it wasn't a success, Paris, it wasn't widely seen, and it didn't. I feel it didn't quite work, but it was very, you know, the scripts were very good. I'm still proud of the scripts. They're very, very funny, you know. But doing Paris taught us how to do Ted.
We'd originally presented it as a mock documentary where Father Ted goes back to the seminary where he became a priest and finds out where all the other priests are that were in his class, and he goes around and catches up with them. And one of the people he catches up with is Father Jack, who's dead, but Ted fails to notice this. So that's where that scene comes from, which was eventually in the 6th episode.
We thought because it was Irish, we'd have to interest people slowly, but the opposite turned out to be true. People are, you know, always desperate for a new sitcom, you know. So we wrote 3 scenes, and again, I don't know why, because we didn't have the confidence or something to do the whole episode. I don't understand why we only did 3 scenes, but they were you know, wavering a bit, and then we handed in the script, and it was immediate. They just immediately said yes, and it was what was great about it was, I think, characters are very, very difficult to find. It's a very, very hard thing to do, and the brilliant thing about Arthur doing it live as a stand-up was he knew who Ted was instinctively at a real gut level. So that when we started writing the character, Arthur would often say to me when we were writing the first series, no, Ted wouldn't say that, or Ted wouldn't curse. I always loved Ted, and Ted's still my favourite character, you know. Yeah,
me too, in the show, yeah.
You know, because he's so, you know, he's so like so many people I know, you know, or I knew when I was growing up, kind of...
he's a decent man, really.
Decent enough, you know, kind of cheap. Actually very
ambitious,
cheap.
very ambitious, but obviously doesn't have any talent.
Doesn't have the talent.
And he's in the wrong job to be ambitious in, anyway.
Yeah.
'Cause he's no real ambitions in the kind of priestly sense. He doesn't want to be a bishop or a cardinal or anything.
No.
He wants
That'd be too much responsibility. He'd be terrified of that.
He wants like really kind of earthly things like money.
He's still doing things like being admitted free into cinemas when he points out his collar and stuff. But those days are coming to an end.
Yeah, the tide is turning.
So when we were writing the first series of Ted, it was Arthur's voice I heard all the time when we were writing Ted. And when I wanted to write Ted, or write his voice, you have to kind of pull your head back and go, God, you know. And suddenly, you know, that's the way he speaks. It's kind of, I suppose, it's a kind of, you know, I don't know how to explain it, but it's a very gentle, always, you know, kind of slight nod in the head. I can't quite explain it.
Yeah.
But it would make the voice happen, and you could easily write in his voice.
A lot of it was the way he talked to his parishioners, you know.
His thing is basically a kind of not wanting to be seen as a priest, which was something I noticed about a lot of priests I knew. If they came into a room, the atmosphere would change very suddenly. It would suddenly...
Everyone would stand up. And they'd say, don't get up. No, don't get up.
Sit down. So what are you watching? What's this?
What's on?
Oh, Top the Pops. You know, and it's like a kind of constant trying to deal with you on a human level, which they were completely unable to do because they were celibate. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's just such a strange life they have. So the very thing they wanted most, which is to connect with people, they would find very difficult to do.
I was watching Prince live in concert and video once at home. I was there with a relation of mine who's a priest, And we were just watching, both of us. He was a very elderly man who'd spent his whole life in small parishes in Ireland. And we were watching Prince live in concert, and I didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything, except he did say then, after a while, what the hell would be going on in his mind? I had no answer to that, really.
It may have been easier in the old days when there was more of a established kind of role in whatever community it happened to be. But I think that that role's becoming a little harder to define now.
Yeah, within the last 10, even probably 10 to 15 years, it's become harder for priests, without a doubt. And their role in society has changed.
Of course, we've been partly responsible for that in Ireland.
Every actor in Ireland who's man would have played a priest at some stage. So they've all done it. Dermot had done it. I knew Dermot because I'd been a fan of... he'd been around for ages in Ireland. I was a fan of his radio show called Scrap Saturday, which is a satirical radio show. And I'd sent him a sketch or two for that. So I kind of knew him, and I'd met him before. And he just seemed right. He looked perfect for Ted, you know.
He was big man, so you know he kind of he had a nice presence, you know. So he was great, and he read very well with Ardle when we did a read through, you know.
He's funny. He's just had that funny thing, you know.
Yeah.
Best thing you can have in an actor is if they're funny.
Yeah, the actors in it were often drawn from the ranks of kind of Ireland's comedians. Dermot was a comedian, mostly known for impressions, actually, which is why his career had kind of stalled, because it couldn't really go further than Ireland because no one knew who he was impersonating. When we saw Ardle, I don't know whether people asked me, did we write Dougal for Ardle?
No.
I can't remember. We didn't really. Dougal came about because we liked the idea of a stupid character, but I think as soon as we saw Ardle, we knew he was.
Yeah.
As soon as we.
Especially because I'd seen a tape that he'd done on RTE, Irish Television.
That's right.
And he was just great in this.
And he has that look of befuddlement that Dougal always has, and it was just literally that one moment. It, on either side of this bit, it was cut. There was no. You know, Arthur and he said, "Look at that! Look at his face." He was perfect for us in terms of the character, you know. But Frank was in a show called Hall's Pictorial Weekly.
Also, he was in a radio show called the Glen Abbey Show, which I used to love when I was about 14 or 15, and he was hilarious, and that was brilliant. So I knew Frank as an actor. I'd never met him before. But he auditioned. I mean, we did audition all these roles, I think. Frank,
I think it took the first series before he really relaxed. It came out, and then when he came back in the second series, he was so enthusiastic. But on the first series, I think he was a tiny bit cautious about investing too much emotionally into the show, which I completely understand, because it did look terrible. I mean, a lot of people would hear about it. Our first episode got some very nasty reviews because it doesn't sound good. You know, the three priests living in Ireland sitcom. It's like, oh, if I heard about it, I'd hate it. You know.
I think the makeup actually got much stronger with Frank over the few series. If you watch the first series, he's not as made up as he is in the later ones.
Frank would eat alone and be alone all day because no one could stand to sit facing him when he was eating dinner because of his makeup, because he had one milky eye, he had stuff coming out of his ear, and close up it was just appalling.
Was horrible close up, yeah.
You know, and it really, and poor old Frank would sit there on his own reading a paper and stuff. Ardle was right on board with us from the first moment, because Ardle's sense of humour is exactly the same as ours. Every line reading he gave was perfect. He knew how to make it work. Pauline was brilliant. She said we were looking for an older actress, and Pauline, you know, we couldn't find one. So they said, well, we'll start looking younger, and they sent a tape of Pauline to us, and she was bang on. So that's how we got, you know, our cast. I think we both were obsessed, possibly to an almost claustrophobic degree, in it not letting down the Irish. We didn't want to have anything that we thought would reek of paddywhackery, which is a kind of vision of Ireland as a harmless, silly place where people are just kind of, pointless or whatever. And I once went on a programme where there was a second-generation Irish woman who was arguing that the show was racist. So you had a woman with an English accent arguing with a man with an Irish accent, and saying that he was being anti-Irish. It was the strangest piece of television.
That's very true. A lot of the older Irish people living in England are pretty insecure. I think that's a problem to have.
I think this is true of America as well. When you get second, third generation, people begin to worry that they're being made fun of, and so
they're hypersensitive and insecure, a lot of them,
Yeah.
But the thing about it is a comedy program, and the kind of program it does feature people being stupid, But that's true of every sitcom.
What I said to this woman who I had the argument with was, if you're so insecure that you can't bear to see Irish people behaving ridiculously or stupidly or whatever, then what you're effectively saying is that Irish people can't be in comedy, and there can't be comedy shows made about Irish people. And also thrillers, because thrillers would involve people behaving badly, dramas, because dramas might involve social problems. It's just a ridiculous argument, and you often see it as well when you look at things about shows that might feature minorities in the States. Often you'll find people coming out against them.
The main problem is comedies like that, and it's true of every comedy, has stupid people in it, and these stupid people just happen to be living on an island off Ireland.
Yeah, but there was an important thing an important thing about Craggy Island, which is that it's a fictional place. We didn't set it in Ireland. We set it in this fictional island off the coast of Ireland. So we weren't making fun of anywhere in Ireland, and I wouldn't have liked that. We wouldn't have done that.
When anyone comes from the mainland, they think it's ludicrous anyway.
Yeah, there's also a view of Ireland that Ireland is kind of untouched by the rest of the world, and of course we're more culturally aware than England, because we get English television, Irish television, and American television. You get music from both sides. And the Irish bring attention, and the Irish know. We'd always say the Irish know a lot about England, political system, structure, what's going on, all this type of thing. The English know nothing about Ireland, so we wanted to show there was a level of sophistication that the English didn't think we were, American or whatever, America didn't think we were enjoying. We always thought it would be funny if Ted talks about Snoop Doggy Dogg and gets it kind of wrong. He calls him Scooby Dog, I think, or something. And these kind of references were very important in Ted. I mean, you see things set in Ireland, for instance, films set in Ireland. It's always in the country and winding roads and stuff. But Dublin, where we met, it's just a city,
But essentially, you're open to the same influences once you've got television and like every newspapers, and once you've got television, essentially, it's the global village,
And we wanted to show that about Ireland. We wanted to show that Ireland wasn't isolated culturally.
We had Radiohead on the soundtrack in TED, and I was trying to do stuff like that.
It was important, but and again, it's something that to us made the show not guilty of paddywhackery and stuff.
People say, where do you get ideas from Father Ted? But like the thing, you do see things in Ireland like which are pretty surreal, really. I mean, there's a great film I saw, footage of the annual blessing of the scooters from about 1963, 64, where all these mods in parkas on scooters file past a priest who blesses them. And it was the same film where I saw footage of priests blessing huge jets, massive jets in Dublin Airport. So that's a pretty surreal image. But also at the same time with stuff like Father Jack, we'd make him a ludicrous caricature of a drunk because he was drinking everything, you know. But that was subverting as well the other way to make it just exaggerate to ludicrous degrees.
Yeah, we thought that there was one thing we did have to do when it came to Irish stereotypes and so on, which is we did have to address them to some extent because those things are sometimes kind of useful to English audiences to get a grasp on what's going on. So what our thinking was if we're going to have a drunk character, then we're going to have a character who's stupidly, surreally drunk and drinks everything. You would drink the juice from a battery, you know, if he could, you know. And if we're going to have and Ireland is also known for supposedly being very friendly, so we thought we'd have the friendliest character who ever lived, which is Mrs. Doyle, who's too friendly and too hospitable and is annoyingly friendly. And Dougal, again, you know, this idea of kind of simple-mindedness that there were lots of Irish jokes and stuff like this. So, you know,
So I think it's
popular in
essentially...
England. So we thought, well, we'll do someone who's completely surreally.
It's a mixture of those kind of exaggerating those kind of stereotypes to a ludicrous degree, and also putting stuff like Radiohead in the soundtrack and making references to Snoop Doggy Dogg or wherever, you know.
What other things did we use that we thought England? Oh, Sinead O'Connor was in there, you know, and you know.
Well, there was a British TV presenter who
He's a bit like
I mean, there's many Irish
TV
presenters who've been successful in Britain. So he was obviously, you could say, he was a mixture of certain people, you know.
Yeah. So again, it's another thing that the English know about Ireland, and again, we just wanted to play with this knowledge and subvert it and exaggerate things, and you know, we're still getting I know it got into trouble in Boston, you know, and someone called it an English program, which I very much resented, you know, because it's Irish made, written, directed, starring Irish actors, you know,
with British resources.
British resources, yeah, we're using British resources. Yeah. We were very lucky in the first series to have Geoffrey Perkins as producer. He was a very instinctive and knowledgeable
And hugely experienced.
Producer. And our initial instincts were to make the show very mad and very anti-sitcom. For instance, the music we originally wanted, Neil Hannon, who did the music, gave us 2 tunes, one of which was very silly, and the other of which was the one we used. And we wanted the silly one.
Well,
but
yeah.
Geoffrey said, well, I don't think you should have a silly one because, you know, you shouldn't make fun of your characters.
What we wanted to do is go for a kind of classic sitcom-y type of theme tune. And in fact, that didn't happen, and we went for a more Irishy one. Now, I've grown to love the Irishy one, but I still would have maybe a 2% preference, just shading it for the original idea we had, just because it makes it less Irish, you know what I mean?
The thing we absolutely refused to have was traditional Irish instruments or things like that. And I guess there was a slight Irish feel to the tune we eventually used, but I do think it's more universal than that. Well, Geoffrey Perkins was just a very good, had a very good effect on us, because apart from anything else, he was very confident. And Ted looks like, from the get-go, looks like a very confident series, you know, and that was probably in part due to us having a strong leader.
It was very smooth. We were very involved with production, and we had no problem. Like, it wasn't that, you know, hear writers say, well, I went in and I know they changed my script and changed everything, but we just very easy time. Generally, we've had a very easy time, I think.
Some of the lines in Ted and some of the jokes were very specific. For instance, there's a joke in the 3rd series where Ted appears as if because he's standing behind something, he looks like he's doing a Hitler impression, and that's a kind of odd joke. It's got an odd build-up as well. the build-up is Ted finds a perfectly square bit of black dirt on the window, which is a terrible piece of exposition, but we were making a point.
But that's part of the fun, really.
That's part of the fun. So, but someone who didn't, if we weren't there, someone might have looked at that and thought, you know what, this is a terrible piece of exposition. Let's change. Let's get a real reason for there being a piece of black dirt on the window. But we didn't want that. We wanted Ted to say, and I remember the line almost exactly, he says, look at that, a perfectly square piece of black dirt on the window. How on earth did that get there? Surely that would be practically impossible. And that's to point out that we know what we're doing, that we're having a laugh. So when the audience laughs at it because they think what an odd thing to say. And then later on when they see it, there's a bigger laugh because it's been set up in that way. Now, it could there might have been a better way of getting that piece of black dirt on the window, but that was our way, and that's the style of the show. What we were good at with Ted was creating those moments where you could throw some different types. I call them joke baskets. You often see them in The Simpsons as well. They'll go into, for instance, Lisa will go into a library and she'll look up golf, and there's a joke basket of all the different headings on the things, and she'll go to Japanese obsession with. We would try and find situations where we could chuck a few gags in.
Visually, it's very influenced by The Simpsons, like really quick cutaways and stuff. It's very influenced by that.
Yeah, we wanted to make The Simpsons, but a live-action Simpsons.
Yeah.
Because because The Simpsons was animated, they could go to the other side of the world and show you something, and we wanted to do that.
It's more expensive because you have to build a set and get everything in for a shot that could last 3 seconds or something. We had
one joke where we invented this thing that you can have a Class A holy relic and a Class B holy relic, and one was due for being upgraded, and Dougal says, how do they decide how to upgrade a relic? And Ted says, a lot of very important decisions go into that, and it's a long process and very involved or whatever. And then we cut to 2 blokes in an office, and one says, how about the Holy Stone of Clonrickard? And the other one goes, whatever.
Pure Simpsons type area, really.
Yeah, that was The Simpsons. Well, at least that was our attempt to do The Simpsons. We had a ball when we were writing it. We weren't arguments or anything like that. We were both on the same page at every point. The only thing, that it wasn't a tension as such. It was just a kind of a good thing to have, which is just that feeling of, it's got to be better. It's got to keep getting funnier and funnier, and each rewrite and rehearsal, it has to get better. And we'd always make it better. We'd always lose things that weren't adding to it, and we were pretty good about things like that. And it just got better and better until by the last week, hopefully we'd have something that was as close to perfect as we could make it.
Largely, we think of funny scenes for them to be in, whether they're on their own or with other people, and it's amazing how you can put funny scenes into shows and just build a plot around them, rather than have a plot and then try and think funny scenes. I think we do more of thinking funny scenes and then putting them in a plot. I think we used to do that more.
Our rule was which Jeffrey Perkins helped us arrive at, was you need about 2 or 3 standout moments, standout scenes that are funny, not because of the dialogue necessarily, but because of what's happening.
The situation.
And if you have if 3 moments like that, and in there I'd include Ted with the Hitler moustache, the essay competition in Flight into Terror.
Even things like what's your biggest wish, Dougal? Or what would you like more than anything else?
Yeah.
That wasn't quite to it.
Yeah,
exactly.
But we
still,
I'd say we're more talking about like the songwriting scene in the Eurovision episode.
Yeah.
If you have those moments and starting to write, God, that's going to be a great scene, and that's going to be a funny one to write. And you have about 3 of them, then you can start writing with a lot of confidence because you're heading towards something very good. I think the best episodes of Ted always have a basis in something that's real in Irish society, like the Lovely Girls competition was based on the Rose of Tralee, and the Eurovision Song Contest. And these are things that have a basis in reality, and I think that possibly the episodes that aren't as strong are ones that don't have any basis at all in reality. And I thought, I don't know whether you'd agree.
Yes, I think that's true. They're all trapped. It's like steptoe son, dad's army. They're all in a situation they aspire to, get out of, but they can't. They're just stuck.
One of the worst things to write, I think, is the first episode of any sitcom, because that's the episode where you have to come up with the reasons why everybody's stuck with each other and why they don't just say, look, I'm sorry, you're too annoying, I'm leaving, But we had a very nice ready-made one in Ted, which is that in the Catholic Church, you go where you're told to go if
exactly.
you're a priest.
Yeah.
So the fact that Ted and Dougal and Jack have all been responsible for misdeeds.
Yes.
If that's a real word. That leads them all to being stuck together because the church has hid them away. The way the church would move on bad priests until finally, we just thought, where's the end of the line? Well, it's Craggy Island. Craggy Island is the last place that, when they can't find anywhere else for you, they'll put you here. So it was a ready-made cage for them. And they're hard to find. The cage is the hardest thing to find, I think. Characters are hard to find, but the cage is very hard to find as well. You need a good one. In Porridge, a British sitcom, they literally had a cage almost. It's set in a prison, So we were lucky really to find that place, to find Craggy Island.
The reason you'd never see them saying mass or taking confession or anything was just, that seemed to be a kind of almost a part of the job that was really boring to them. The real job of being a priest was to go to race meetings and have a few sherries at the end of the day and just generally sit around. You get the impression not only Ted, but lots of other priests are kind of running around trying to avoid their bishop who'll try and get them to do some work.
There's been a number of religious sitcoms in the past, and we didn't want to write one that would use some of the staples of religious sitcom situations. Like for instance, let's say Ted eats a laxative and then has to do a sermon and has to keep going to the toilet, or something like that. We didn't want to enter into that area of kind of amusing things happening at Mass. We weren't interested in it. We were interested in their daily lives. And to be honest with you, sometimes the fact that they were priests was very unimportant to the comedy, So
It was never meant to be a satire on religion or anything.
We just wanted to poke gentle fun and talk about how silly, people who think they're, how silly people in authority can be, and we're all human, and even though Ted is supposed to be this very respected member of the community, he doesn't really have any right to be seen in this way because he's just a human being.
He's flawed.
Like the rest of us. So really, it was his humanity that we were interested in, rather than the religious trappings.
He's a career priest in that it's just a job for him. He's a very unspiritual man, and he likes, in fact, anytime Dougal raises a kind of theological issue, Ted changes the subject because you can't take it on board. No one can explain that really, because it's the irrational against the rational. So no one can explain that, let alone Ted. So it's embarrassing for him to even contemplate theological issues. But Dougal, like a child, like the wisdom of a child or something, points things out that are maybe satirical about religion, and that religion is an absolutely fantastic irrational idea.
Ted is our favourite character, but I know why Dougal is liked, and he's liked because we give him all the stupid lines and stupid lines.
Kids love him, Kids absolutely adore him.
But Ardle's performance combined with these lines really sold the jokes. The jokes just came across beautifully, and we'd say things like, Ardal would know this instinctively, but sometimes we'd say things like, you know, he has no attention span. So he won't, if he's really unhappy, it'll only be for a second, then he'll get distracted by something. And I think people were picking up on that, and it's a very funny thing, the idea of a human being who really has the attention span of a dog, and who's never unhappy because he's too stupid to feel anything deeply. So
I like when he does things like he's rude to people and he says, "Who are you?" and stuff like that, which he doesn't do a lot, but I kind of like because it comes out of nowhere.
Actually, we wrote that down. That's a good example of Ardal taking something that we wrote. We just wrote down, "Who are you?" Or, you know, in the way that you would say.
He could have played it, yeah, but he played it.
You could play it like this. You could play it like, "Who are you?"
Just as if not knowing. But he
Who are you?
Yeah, he played it in a really aggressive, rude way, which is brilliant way to do.
And then every time we got a chance, we'd always have Ardal say, "Who are you?" You know, because it just struck us as so funny.
Yeah, it's a great way to do it.
Yeah, Mrs. Doyle's character and Jack's character were kind of not quite as useful because they really don't really pay attention to the world around them. Mrs. Doyle is like a costume designer who'll only look at the script for when she needs to work as a costume designer. Oh, right, she's wearing a hat. You know, Mrs. Doyle will hear someone's coming and go, "Oh, I better get out the best china," and stuff like that. And that's all she does, really. She never really, you know, some of the best episodes are ones where she's more involved, like Speed 3, where she's being she gets very flirtatious with Pat Mustard. But generally, Dougal and Ted are the ones who
they get involved in the main story.
Get involved and change people's lives for the worse.
The other two, especially Jack, usually has the function of just embarrassing them in public.
Yeah.
They're frightened of him, which is good, and they have to keep an eye on him all the time. He can spoil their best laid plans at any time.
I remember turning to Arthur and saying, "Dougal never speaks to Jack." And we just suddenly realised that he never speaks to him.
He's really afraid of him.
Directly address. He would always talk about Jack. Now, Jack did this, Jack did that, but he will never go up and say, "Can I get you a cup of tea? Can I do anything for you?" They don't. There's no connection there at all. Whereas Ted always leaning over Jack. Would you like a cup of tea? Or, you know, all that type of thing. But they're little things that we realize that help you create a character when you realise, oh, okay, so that's that relationship. They don't. And actually, suddenly you've got a potentially funny scene. Like if Jack and Dougal were left alone in a room, that would immediately be a funny scene because they don't talk to each other.
Mrs. Doyle and Dougal and Father Jack are cartoon characters, really. But Ted is kind of more. You could put him in a proper show, and he'd be rounded enough. But the others are kind of funny because they're caricatures, really.
That's exactly the reason we thought we could only do 3 series.
Yeah, exactly.
There's only so much we can stand Jack shouting "feck, drink arse," let alone the audience. And I have a theory about audiences. I think they get bored of a thing before they know they're bored of it. Yeah.
I kind of just got the impression everyone thought it had done its natural lifestyle. I think Hattrick would have wanted us to do another series.
So Channel 4. In fact, I know Channel 4 would have.
Because it was, you know, it went out on a high.
But, you know, they did,
I can't remember, to be honest.
It's such a strange show, you know. It just really, you know, we would have been repeating ourselves, you know. It was good to get out when we did, you know. I do kind of feel sorry that I can't pop in on them because really when you're writing and it's going well, it really is like, it's not like writing, it's like, this is a cliche, a lot of writers say this, but it is true. It's like switching on a tape recorder and they talk to you, they tell you what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And they would surprise us. They would do things that would just, you know, take us aback, you know, and that was a lovely feeling of constantly being surprised by something that you were actually writing, you know. So I miss it for that reason, but
it's very hard to get all the ingredients together, you know.
You can't just recreate it.
Yeah.
Me and Arthur can't just say, let's do another thing where that suddenly happens.
A lot of things, it's a big X factor, you know. You can't really legislate for.
And also we were hungry, you know, figuratively and literally. We were ambitious and we were hungry and
I'm very lucky, you know, it's obvious, but the cast is hugely important. We're just very lucky with the cast.
But you know, you've got to. It was written at a certain time. We were a certain age, and we were we were very excited about being able to do this thing, you know.
It also hastened or happened simultaneously with as regards the Irish thing. People's attitudes towards the church were changing, and you know, it happened at the right time. We couldn't have. There's no way we could have done it 10 years before that.
And possibly, well, maybe we could do it now. But it was the right kind of timing and stuff.
I like seeing the videos in the shops and seeing getting the DVD through the post. I like that. I like to have that in a kind of permanent record. Like, it's not something people say that about theatre. Once you've done it, it's gone. I like the fact TED is a solid thing you can have forever. Especially with DVDs, because tapes would probably wear out after 100 years.